Shadow Hack. Chapter 621, Northern Land of Ice. In the Flying Cloud City, people had already begun to prepare for war with great fanfare. They weren't from the same plane of Earth, strictly speaking, and weren't affiliated to any power on it. Instead, they were the powers of a region of one of the planes among the 66 of them who had dispatched countless flux experts with the intention of launching a large-scale attack on Lucky Wind City. This was a historic moment for them. If they could wipe out Lucky Wind City, they would successfully become its and even the Earth's masters. With time, they could also enjoy the resources of this plane. Moreover, all the powers and people of Earth would be under their command. Jade-Face Master and Greenwood's Manor Master led the countless flux experts in the vicinity of Lucky Wind City to launch a sneak attack. In the meantime, Black Mountain's old goblin would draw out the people of Lucky Wind City from the front. As for the red-bearded saint, he was at the rear of Lucky Wind City, intending to sever their path of retreat. The four had investigated for a very long and planned meticulously before deciding on this strategy. If Li Yunmei was present, their attempt would have been impossible, and they knew it very well. But with Li Yunmei being gone, they looked upon Lin Yuero, that little lassie, with quite a lot of disdain. A woman sitting in the position of a city lord seemed quite flashy, and in their eyes, she wasn't qualified to become the hegemon of this region. They felt that with her watching over them, Lucky Wind City would only be formidable in appearance. Although its supreme transcending experts possessed tyrannical strength, their numbers were pitifully low. If that woman thought that Lucky Wind City could resist the magnificent army by just relying on its top people, it was simply a joke. A crisis had come at Lucky Wind City from all directions, but there was still no movement within it. Regardless of how much Black Mountain's old goblin coerced the people of Lucky Wind City to come out, they remained aloof like a ghost town. What's the situation? Black Mountain's old goblin became somewhat suspicious. This was a strategy decided upon after negotiation by all of them, so how could Lucky Wind City become empty all of a sudden? Could they be pretending? Black Mountain's old ghost didn't dare to launch a large-scale attack and could only continue to stand lifelessly in front of Lucky Wind City. In the end, he decided to break all the defensive mechanisms in the surroundings before leading his men to forcefully enter the city. But what left him astonished was that Lucky Wind City's originally invulnerable defenses were broken effortlessly. This also went without a hitch. Black Mountain's old goblin stood at the gate of the city, hesitant once more. Should they attack or retreat? He found himself in a situation where he could neither advance nor retreat. Jade-Face Master and Greenwood Manor Master, who had been waiting to launch a sneak attack, began to grow impatient. What is Black Mountain's old goblin doing? Why hasn't he launched the attack until now? Is it possible that he is waiting for us to attack first? There's something strange going on in this Lucky Wind City. How could everything proceed so smoothly? Is it possible that she is using the empty city strategy, where she left the city unattended hoping that we will suspect an ambush? Jade-Face Master narrowed his eyes and stated, what sort of war strategies could this silly little girl understand? Hurry up! The more you delay the battle, the deeper we'll sink into their trap. Hearing the chiding by Jade-Face Master, Black Mountain's old goblin, who had been hesitating for a long time, led his flux experts into the city. But what caused him to panic was that when they entered, several transcending level experts appeared before they had even stabilized themselves. The ambushers were all elites, and the people led by Black Mountain's old goblin were caught off guard. The situation of the battle was reversed instantly. Damn, we have fallen for their trap. This little girl. Before he could even finish his sentence, the four shadows appeared before him. They were Li Yun, Li Fend, Li Dai, and Li Tian, left behind by Li Yunmei. They appeared like demons and surrounded Black Mountain's old ghost. Although his strength couldn't compare to that of Battle God or Blade Master, he was still confident in himself. Yet he and the powers with which he had allied that were good at strategy and skillful in scheming had fallen for the trap set by the little girl. Jade-Face Master and Greenwood Manor Master were extremely shocked. The city lord of Lucky Wind City hadn't relied on brute force to crush the opponent, but instead used strategy and tactics. This knowledge left them panicked. Quick, flee. The present Lucky Wind City isn't the same as the one which relied only on brute force. Greenwood's manor master hadn't finished speaking when continuous shouts rang out all around him. The flux experts attacking the city had been encircled and annihilated, while the ambush armies were outflanked by a group of people from both sides in a way that not a single person could escape. Redbeard Saint, who had been stationed at the rear of Lucky Wind City to cut off further reinforcement, was also caught by vampires who had surrounded him promptly. The head of vampires laughed heartily. Just as the city lord anticipated, you ants from another plane joined forces to stand on equal footing with our plane. Black Mountain's old goblin shook from head to toe when he saw the little girl Linuero appear at the center of the battlefield without the protection of any supreme transcending level experts. She coldly snorted and stated, "Your thoughts to attack our Lucky Wind City have been seen through a long time ago. So I laid this inescapable net, waiting for you all to walk right into it. Now, are you convinced?" The people were naturally convinced. When Li Yunmia was present, they had been suppressed by force. When they found the opportunity at the time Li Yunmia wasn't around, they were surprisingly proved inferior in terms of intelligence as well. Feeling ashamed, Black Mountain's old goblin said with a sigh, "Heavens didn't support me." Linuero waved her hand. "I will let you all do the rest." Li Yun, Li Dai, Li Feng, and Li Tian replied positively and tied up all those who had launched the surprise attack, taking them as captives. As for the other flux experts, all those who surrendered and paid allegiance to Lucky Wind City lived, while others died. Upon hearing such choices, all the flux experts naturally surrendered. Because of that, Lucky Wind City expanded, and their military force also grew much stronger. This was of great significance for the future of the city. Li Yun, Li Tian, Li Dai, and Li Feng had followed Linuero's arrangement. All of them wondered where she had obtained the information that the people of the other planes with ulterior motives would launch a surprise attack. The only reason the four had resisted their desire to attack was because of their complete confidence in her. Li Yunmu's choice hadn't been wrong. With the arrival of Linuero, Lucky Wind City became even more stable. Its influence spread even farther, and the right to proclaim itself as the hegemon of the 66 projection planes was just around the corner. Black Mountain's old goblin, Jade Face Master, Greenwood's Manor Master and Redbeard Saint were brought to Lucky Wind City and put in front of Linuero. "Do you still intend to stand against our supreme transcending level experts?" Chapter 622, Removing the Seal. Northern Land of Ice was completely black, with no daylight. There was no lethargic sunlight, only white snowflakes falling from the sky. Rows of footprints could be seen on the snow which covered 1,000 miles. Li Yunmu had traveled over land and water to reach the region, but he hadn't thought that the wilderness would be hidden beneath boundless ice. Yet where Odin lay dormant was still quite a distance away. With Brunhilde pointing out the directions, it was unlikely that Li Yunmu would lose himself in the boundless snow. They were quickly getting closer to the frozen mound where Odin, the god of distant past, lay without his divine awareness. Yet because of the destruction caused by his daughter at Whale City, he had become the target of resentment of other gods. If Odin was truly awakened from dormancy, he would probably become Hades' first target. When a daughter provoked misfortune, her father would naturally be the one to bear the consequences. This was an established convention from the past. But Hades still hadn't left, while Li Yunmu had already reached the frozen land. Sleipnir looked at the frozen mound at the center of the boundless snow and instantly crawled on the ground as if it had lost its footing and began to communicate with Odin with his divine awareness. "Master! Lord has come. He can assist you in removing the seal and restoring your divine awareness. The past glory of our Scandinavia will return once again." Brunhilde also knelt down on the ground and murmured, "Waiting for our father to awaken, waiting for Scandinavia to recover its past glory." The system sighed. "To think that so many years have passed. Odin, you old bastard, you will owe this old man a favor." The system's strength was transmitted through Li Yunmu's body into the frozen mound, and a gloomy and cold presence was emitted. It seemed to swallow the entire sheet of snow. Suddenly, an icy flame rose out of the frozen mound, thawing the seal of ice covering Odin. The flame in Li Yunmu's hand melted the ice over the frozen mound. Li Yunmu clearly understood that this wasn't his accomplishment, but rather the system concealed in his body using his hand to allow Odin to recover his divine awareness. The seal of ice over Odin's body melted at an increasingly faster rate, which stunned both Brunhilde and Sleipnir. The guy hidden in the body of the mortal was truly terrifying. After Scandinavia's pride, Odin, had been sealed in ice, no one was able to rescue him. Yet that guy was able to do it, so just how terrifying his might was? But they didn't know that this was only part of the system's ability. Only Li Yunmu understood that the system could be said to be omnipotent and omniscient. But no one knew its true identity. A few mysterious details had been leaked out before, but Li Yunmu could not understand them. The ice slowly melted under Sleipnir and Brunhilde's shocked gazes. In reality, they had only held a bit of hope, but hadn't truly believed that the clown hidden inside Li Yunmu could truly remove the seal from Odin's body. Yet before their eyes, Odin's body was slowly breaking out of the ice. This was an extraordinary news for Scandinavia. Not only that, if those people who previously possessed high status in Scandinavia learned that Odin had left the frozen mound, they would also return to Scandinavia. That would be tantamount to Scandinavia's power being unleashed once more. Li Yunmu didn't know whether they would be able to restore their former glory or not, but at least he would have found an existence which could contend with other powers of the origin world. Bang! Bang! The ice and snow found it difficult to keep Odin's body buried. After the seal over him melted, his body gradually recovered, and his divine awareness also began to condense. Li Yunmu felt the burning hot power like a red flame coming out of his hand to melt the millennium-old ice seal over Odin's body. Even flame god Loki might not have been able to melt the ice seal. How did he do it? Brunhilde murmured. Bean-sized beads of sweat covered Li Yunmu's forehead. When the red flame had melted the frozen mound, Odin not only did not feel the cold, a heat current rushed through his body. Ha ha! Covered in ice, Odin finally reacted and tried to move his body. At that moment, Brunhilde's eyes filled with astonishment and she cried out, unable to restrain her emotions. "Father!" Hearing his daughter's shout, Odin's divine awareness also showed some reaction. It had barely congealed, but it began to recover as well. Odin didn't know who had helped him, but the familiarity of their power gave him a peace of mind. "Who was it that awakened me?" Li Yunmu clenched his teeth only to hear System say indifferently to him, "Do it for a while more. If you can't even endure this little amount of pain, how can you talk about controlling your destiny?" After being berated by the system, Li Yunmu shouted loudly. The power in his hand increased by a fold, and Odin's upper body almost came out of the ice seal. Sleipnir crawled forward and excitedly said to Odin, "Welcome back, my master. Lead our Scandinavia to glory again." Sleipnir's voice almost roused Odin's divine awareness. The god's gaze fell on his mount's body, and it turned soft. "Thou hath worked hard." Using Li Yunmu's voice, the system chose that moment to speak disdainfully, said to Odin, who had recovered more than half of his divine awareness. "Hello, old bastard. It was clearly this old man who rescued you, but you only thanked your mount and daughter. What did they do?" "Only begged me, and that's all." Hearing this voice, Odin was instantly stunned, and in the corner of his eye, he saw the young man. Li Yunmu didn't react and promptly pulled back his hands. He then stated, "What are you looking at me for?" "Those words weren't mine." Odin sensed that Li Yunmu was extraordinary. In his body, there was a soul which filled even him with dread. That soul was extremely familiar, to the extent that his whole body trembled slightly. "Hath thou returned?" Odin's complexion slowly loosened. He had never expected the former king would surprisingly use a mortal's body to return once more. "Humph! Old bastard, you finally recognized me. Just recently, your spirit soldiers attacked us and you dispatched your daughter to kill us. You have already forgotten our previous relation. Do you want me to help you recall it? Chapter 623, Odin's Hostility. Odin's expression slowly relaxed, since his body could finally move. With the assistance of the king in Li Yunmu's body, he had awakened. He had been asleep for a really long time. When he saw Li Yunmu, his gaze filled with astonishment. No need, I owe you a favor. How will thou want me to repay it? The system still had Li Yunmu adopt a frivolous appearance and said with ridicule, you should know that your treasured daughter has fallen in love with this mortal. According to the rules of Scandinavia, if the people of Scandinavia fall in love with a mortal, then what should be the punishment? Brunhilde's complexion suddenly changed, she knelt promptly and lowered her. Father, she said in a soft voice. Odin waved his hand to cut her off, stating, it's fine. If my daughter likes him, then so what if he is a mortal? Thou's elder brother Thor also fell in love with a mortal. Although I opposed that marriage, the marriages of children are their own matter. Hearing Odin being so open-hearted, the system laughed and said, old bastard. I didn't think that after being sealed here for 1,000 years, your thoughts would change to this extent. Brunhilde also couldn't believe that the words from just a moment ago were surprisingly said by her father's mouth. Where had the old-time strictness gone? What had happened with her elder brother Thor that had changed Odin's thinking? Odin's gaze became somewhat abstruse, and he coldly said, at that time, when we were confronting the Dark Fairy, if not for Odin's wife that mortal, perhaps the whole of Scandinavia would have been destroyed. Therefore now, we don't hold much prejudice toward mortals. Also, Thor taking that mortal as a wife had even turned her into a god. Brunhilde, who knelt on the ground, turned emotional and said to Odin, many thanks to Lord Father. Sleipnir also followed and agreed. My master's fame and wisdom spread far. Although the Dark Fairy had been eradicated, my people then faced the crisis of God's dusk. Other gods probably don't know Scandinavia's secret, let alone our reason behind protecting this land of ice. With great difficulty, Li Yunmu broke away from the system's control and asked in a gentle tone, what secret is that exactly? Since you have already agreed to my marriage with Brunhilde, shouldn't Scandinavia's secret also not be concealed from me? Li Yunmu's aim behind coming to the origin world was to understand everything clearly. He didn't want to sink down to become other people's chess piece. He also didn't want to place all hopes on a single person in case they might become feudal. Thus, he quickly asked Odin a follow-up question. However, Odin sensed the soul in Li Yunmu's body had already scattered and said in a heavy voice, mortal. If I was not giving face to the king in thou's body, thou wouldn't even possess the qualifications to talk to me. Thou should feel grateful. My divine princess, heaven's proud daughter, thou should feel honored. Li Yunmu saw that Odin had begun to raise his divine might and said with a cold snort, you all keep blabbering on about gods and not gods, but that has no relation to me. I only want to understand the situation of the origin world. If you don't want to tell me, that is also all right. Humph, worst comes to worst, I will have to find it myself. I don't need your kindness. And you will eternally owe me for not backing me. Impudent. Mortal, don't be rude and talk properly with father. Brunhilde opened her eyes widely and promptly pulled Li Yunmu to kneel on the ground. But Li Yunmu also had a lofty character. With Odin being so rude to him, he naturally wouldn't be polite. The system chose that moment to speak in an indifferent manner to him. Do you still want to mix in with the origin world or not? If you think about it, then aren't you unable to endure even this little grievance? This is a good opportunity for you to discuss marriage. Li Yunmu let out a snort. If you want to discuss, then discuss on your own. Since we have already awakened Odin, we should now speak about the alliance and not about the matters of marriage of his children. Odin, you probably still don't know about the changed circumstances of the origin world? You have been hibernating for very long, and in that time, the origin world has been divided by factions of ancient gods. Do you believe that your Scandinavia is still as powerful as before? This old man wouldn't surrender to anyone, so you also shouldn't hope that he would yield to you. From the start, I have been in control of my own fate. The reason why we awoke you from the ice seal was to draw support from your strength and establish a foundation in this world. If you consider us as outsiders, then there's no need to talk about this marriage. You. Brunhilde anxiously pointed at Li Yunmu. She didn't even dare to imagine that the person who had publicly confessed to her and the person who was speaking rudely to her father right then was the same one. Odin's complexion turned indignant and he said in a cold voice, "Mortal, I clearly understand the difference between gods and ants. If you despise this mortal, why did you act like someone who never offends anybody in front of the presence in my body?" Li Yunmu asked calmly. His words were like a slap to Odin's face. Once the system retreated, Odin's true thoughts had come pouring out. From the time Scandinavia was established, he had never changed his views toward mortals. Gods were gods, and mortals were mortals. He had indeed agreed to the matter of Thor's marriage with a mortal, but Thor had been banished to the mortal world and received proper punishment. And his mortal bride had also received the curse of heaven. It was impossible for gods and mortals to have a proper ending. Odin was completely clear in his heart that even if he didn't obstruct this matter, there would be others who would work against them. This was related to Scandinavia's dignity, and its prestige was inviolable. The system sneered at Odin. "You old bastard, I thought you had truly changed your thinking and hadn't expected that you would still remain stubborn. Never mind, since you have deep complaints toward the host chosen by me, then we will not talk of this matter." Odin had given his consent just a moment ago, so who would have guessed that Brunhilde would crawl to his feet to beg him? "I hope father agrees to this matter. I and this mortal love each other sincerely. The long spear has also approved of him. If daughter is unable to marry him, then I am afraid that I will become the joke among all the gods of this world. If you marry this mortal, then it will turn Scandinavia into a joke and bring disgrace to it," Odin replied with coldness in his tone. "But if elder brother can marry a mortal, why can't I do the same?" Brunhilde finally rebelled slightly. It was perhaps because she had been influenced by Li Yunmu's resistance. "Thor received heavenly punishment for that, so do you also want to be punished by the heavens?" Odin asked in heavy voice. Chapter 624, An Effortless Victory. Black Mountain's old goblin was deathly pale. The winner was always the king, and the loser a bandit. The old goblin understood this principle better than anyone. Before, they had campaigned everywhere in their plane and had become its hegemon, but now they had fallen before the Lucky Wind City. Jade Face Master coldly said, "If you want to kill us, then go ahead, but we vow that we won't rebel." Lin Yuero kneaded her forehead before speaking with indifference. "Seems like you have an unyielding character, but you are displaying it at the wrong place. If I don't kill you today, it can't be guaranteed that you won't seek to harm my Lucky Wind City in the future. But seeing your unyielding character, it would be a pity to kill you all. It truly is a headache. I also don't wish to waste words on you. If you are willing to surrender and swear allegiance, my Lucky Wind City will welcome you. But if you had vowed to die rather than to obey, then today I can only execute you." Greenwood's Manor Master hurriedly spoke up. "City Lord, I Greenwood's Manor Master am willing to surrender and swear allegiance to Lucky Wind City. Me and my people are willing to offer our lives and will never show disloyalty." In order to survive, Greenwood's Manor Master promptly surrendered. This caused his three comrades to become unable to restrain their rage. Who would have known that their companion was such a coward? Just 2 or 3 words from Lucky Wind City's City Lord, and he had been persuaded. "Greenwood's Manor Master, you scum! A man should feel incomparable glory in dying in battle. People like you, who are greedy for life and afraid of death, aren't fit for leading a great army." Redbeard Saint furiously bellowed. Greenwood's Manor Master trembled, but did not back down. I told you before that we shouldn't plot this matter, but you all didn't listen. City Lord, I actually had no intention of offending Lucky Wind City. If not for the three of them bewitching me, I wouldn't be here today. City Lord, you are magnanimous, so please let me go. I guarantee you that in the future, I will definitely not look for trouble with Lucky Wind City. You shameless scum! Black Mountain's old goblin couldn't control his fury. Jade Face Master also sneered, truly a coward. A ball of energy congealed in Lin Yuero's hand and rushed toward Greenwood's Manor Master. His eyes went wide in disbelief before he fell on the ground. What he couldn't understand was that since he had clearly surrendered, why had the City Lord gotten rid of him? Lin Yuero withdrew her hand and said to the three people with shocked faces, "You three have passed Lucky Wind City's test. If you are willing to join me, you are welcome to do so at any time. If you aren't willing to join, then we will immediately release you. But remember that if you leave Lucky Wind City, the next time we encounter each other, we will be enemies and I will definitely not hold back. That would be respectful to you and honorable for our soldiers." Her words left Jade Face Master and others completely stunned. They couldn't imagine them coming out of a woman's mouth. The three men took a deep breath and suddenly knelt on the ground, saying to Lin Yuero, "We three are willing to pledge eternal loyalty to Lucky Wind City, and we will never go back on our word. If we break our word, then we may not have a good death." Looking at the three men submitting themselves, the four shadows Li Yun, Li Dai, Li Feng, and Li Tian were shocked. This was Lin Yuero? She was clearly a person kind on the outside but inwardly evil. Handing his back to her had been Li Yunmu's best decision. The shadows finally understood what was meant by an effortless victory. Each and every move made by Lin Yuero looked to be taken from the textbook of contending for Earth's supremacy. It was something that could be called obtaining the will of people. Li Yunmu had suppressed everyone and forced them to surrender. However, Lin Yuero had used another method which didn't rely on combat prowess, but rather wisdom to force the people of other planes to surrender and swear allegiance to Lucky Wind City. The two were completely different methods, and the difference between their results were also very different. Although Li Yunmu could suppress the powers of different planes, the majority of them hadn't sincerely surrendered and paid allegiance. Most of them were only afraid of Li Yunmu's strength. Once he left, they all began to stir. This caused Lucky Wind City's foundation to become unstable. But once Lin Yuero took over, she directly attacked the will of the people, which forced the powers of different nationalities to surrender. Because of this, even if the day arrived when the backbone of Lucky Wind City broke, their rear wouldn't end up in complete chaos. City Lord, my admiration towards you has increased greatly. These people who formerly didn't accept Lucky Wind City's rule have yielded sincerely. Lin Yuero was looking at the disadvantageous information surrounding Lucky Wind City, so she spoke with knitted her eyebrows. Why is the information regarding this region completely blank? Does this place have some secret powers? Li Yun glanced at the information and said while shaking his head, "It isn't clear. It might be because we still haven't explored them and collected enough detailed information regarding them." Lin Yuero nodded. If some other power appeared in that region, it could easily surround our Lucky Wind City. If it is allowed to hone its strength for one big push, our Lucky Wind City could be caught unprepared. This gives me a great headache. Li Tian, dispatch some people to investigate all such places properly. If you discover some new power, set out with soldiers and crush them while they are in the cradle. A hint of ruthlessness appeared on Lin Yuero's face. Li Tian, who led the other three shadows, promptly replied, "Yes. City Lord, we will immediately get to work. Do you wish to give us any other commands? Make some discreet inquiries about the frontline heavens. I sense some uneasiness in that region," Lin Yuero indifferently stated. Li Tian nodded, agreeing. Then, he led the other three shadows out of her room. With the dangers lurking around Lucky Wind City, Lin Yuero couldn't relax in the slightest. If she did, the many enemies around them would make use of the opportunity. Lin Yuero narrowed her eyes and suddenly began to smile. If those enemies exposed any weakness, she might be able to catch them all in one fell swoop. At that time, Lucky Wind City's position would become a lot more stable. Lin Yuero took a deep breath and suddenly took out the cultivation relaying globe, then she began to cultivate according to the cultivation method passed on by Li Yunmu. Since she had started, she could feel that her strength was progressing quickly. This made her wonder whether the strength of the supreme transcending level experts had also increased to another step. With that thought in mind, Lin Yuero inquired about the supreme transcending level experts in the city and learned that their strength had also increased. The cultivation method spread by Li Yunmu had been greatly effective. If they continued to develop their strength with the same momentum, then in the future, Lucky Wind City would definitely become a sacred land whose dignity was inviolable. Lin Yuero was very happy about this. She hadn't failed to live up to Li Yunmu's expectations. Although she didn't possess any great strength, she could organize manpower and arrange armies as well as plan war strategies. This was extremely crucial for any group contending for supremacy. Chapter 625, God's Test. Brunhilde took a deep breath and glanced at Li Yunmu's rebellious appearance. Upon seeing it, she lowered herself even more and said softly to Odin, "My father, I am willing to receive any heavenly tribulation. I only hope that father gives his blessings to this wedding." What? Brunhilde had surprisingly taken the initiative to agree to the wedding? This was out of Li Yunmu's expectations. Moreover, based on the determined expression on her face, she had probably made a firm resolution long ago. Li Yunmu could make out from Brunhilde's eyes that she was actually a very emotional person. In the end, she still made a choice between Scandinavia's dignity and personal affection. When she heard that her elder brother had broken the fetters of Scandinavia, she was quite moved. She also became somewhat suspicious about what exactly was the prestige of Scandinavia which she had protecting for so long. Why could elder brother fight for his happiness, but she couldn't do the same? She was somewhat unwilling, but didn't dare to casually speak about this unwillingness in her heart. Thus, she could only vent her dissatisfaction by protecting the mortal in front of her father. She knelt on the ground, but didn't feel the slightest bit of regret. Instead, she was extremely proud of her action. At least she could finally comply with her heart's wishes. How couldn't Li Yunmu not know the consequences of Brunhilde's actions? If it was that easy to endure heavenly retribution, why didn't the countless mortals and gods who had fallen in love with each other have had a good ending? He didn't wish for Brunhilde to sacrifice her life for his sake, so he had to do something to stop Odin's fury. Sure enough, Odin was extremely furious and loudly bellowed at Brunhilde. "Thou understand that this is a disgrace towards Scandinavia." Odin's voice was extremely imposing, because of which Brunhilde, who was kneeling on the ground, felt her whole body shudder slightly. If Odin blamed her, then she might even be given corporal punishment. As expected, Odin lifted Brunhilde up with both hands. Brunhilde felt suffocated, and her face turned completely red. Could it be that her father truly intended to kill her? For trying to obtain lifelong happiness? This was truly an irony. Throughout all those years, she had been protecting the dignity and honor of Scandinavia, but in the end, she still had to fight against her father for her own matters. What was a god? What then was a mortal? Could they truly not be together? But she couldn't deceive the love in her heart. At last, she clearly understood why her elder brother had been unable to leave the mortal woman after falling in love with her. Because no one can control these matters. Seeing that Brunhilde had been lifted by Odin, Li Yunmu filled with fury and loudly roared at Odin, "Put her down for me. Otherwise, I won't be polite toward you. Without caring whether you are Odin or whoever. Put her down for me." Odin disdainfully glanced at Li Yunmu and sneered. "Mortal, this is an internal matter of Scandinavia in which you can't get involved." Odin's other hand rushed out, advancing toward Li Yunmu as if he was about to get rid of him. This was the so-called divine power which could shake the world. With a slight wave of hand, the entire land of ice began to crack. If Li Yunmu hadn't reacted quickly, his body would have been crushed by the shock. Rage filled Li Yunmu, who had been resentful toward Odin from the start. Gradually, energy condensed in his body, and his terrifying might cut through the ground. His body suddenly erupted with strength, and a monstrous battle intent arose within him. How? Li Yunmu transformed into a blade, and his shadows followed after, surrounding him as they transformed into countless blade projections. At that moment, there was only one thought in his mind, and it was to kill that fat Odin sitting in front of him and rescue Brunhilde. The blade sliced down, and another one in which all the shadows had combined did the same. As the two blades fell, Odin used his enormous hand to barely stop Li Yunmu's powerful attack. Odin raised the corner of his mouth and threw a punch which crushed the entire frozen land. Li Yunmu used shadow carapace to avoid this calamity and arrived behind Odin, wanting to stun him with an attack. But his intention was seen through by Odin, who turned around and threw another punch. The space of the land of ice was quickly ripped apart. Seeing the battle between the mortal and Odin, Sleipnir was left speechless by shock. When Brunhilde, who was being held by Odin by her neck, saw Li Yunmu trading blows with her father, a special sensation rose in her heart. Unknowingly, a sparkling teardrop slid down from her eye. What sort of feeling was this? Li Yunmu was being forced back by Odin, so his eyes turned red and his next step formed in his mind. He spared no effort to use tyrannical cross-shaped arms when Odin's arm clasped around his petite body. Odin was an enormous man and was finding it increasingly more difficult to move in front of the agile Li Yunmu. Not only that, he was still forced to defend against the attacks of the shadows surrounding Li Yunmu. Although they instantly scattered from his attacks, they quickly reformed and continued to attack him. Finally, a hint of cold sweat appeared on Odin's forehead. The mortal surprisingly possessed such formidable strength? Although if his divine awareness had recovered completely, the mortal would have been killed a long time ago. But in the end, the opponent had only attacked him to save his daughter. Actually, his heart had cleared up by then. He had only wanted to test the mortal's love for his daughter. Now seeing Li Yunmu attack like a bloodthirsty animal, he was completely convinced in his heart. Li Yunmu took that moment to ruthlessly spat out, "Give me half a year, and I will become a god. I will gain a spot among the ranks of gods, and at that time, I will request Brunhilde's hand in marriage from you." Upon hearing Li Yunmu's words, Odin's complexion changed slightly. But only slightly, and it regained its former imposingness right after. Brunhilde hadn't thought that Li Yunmu would make such a promise. She endlessly rejoiced in her heart, and finally a hint of a smile which was rarely seen covered her face. Previously, she would never smile, but after getting to know the mortal, she finally exposed a smile. Odin's expression somewhat eased, and he asked in a heavy tone, "Mortal, is what you said true?" The system had no patience for him, however. "Old bastard, clearly you are putting on an act, so why are you insisting that other people clap and applaud you? I am already losing it. If you want to give him a little test, won't this promise suffice?" Odin lost some face because of the system's words. Even if it was getting tired, it shouldn't have revealed the truth, right? Chapter 626, There's no need to talk so much. Li Yunmu dumbfoundedly looked at Odin and asked with his eyebrows knitted, "This is my test? What do you mean? Are you making fun of me?" The system promptly answered him. "This matter isn't related to me. I only assisted in raising the matter of marriage. As for that old bastard Odin, he approved it first and then opposed it because of your agreement to this marriage." Li Yunmu almost pulled the hairs from his head. He was once more cheated by the mother-f***ing system? But upon seeing the smile on Brunhilde's face which had blossomed like a peach, the fury in Li Yunmu's heart subsided a little. Perhaps the alliance with Scandinavia would begin to take shape from the marriage between him and Brunhilde. Odin nodded with satisfaction. Mortal, thou must remember your promise. Don't fail to live up to my princess hopes. Looking at Odin's gaze, which was filled with confidence, Li Yunmu indifferently said, however, danger lurks everywhere in the origin world. How should we confront the circumstances? You don't need to be afraid. Now that you have that old bastard Odin backing you, those ancient gods won't be able to harm us, the system replied calmly. Suddenly, a black cloud rushed over the land of ice as if trying to swallow this entire region. The unexpected transformation of the sky caused huge changes in Odin's complexion. Even the system was startled, but it was only a spirit hiding in Li Yunmu's body, so it quickly concealed its presence and let Li Yunmu be the scapegoat. Brunhilde also raised her head to see the black cloud and mist. How could such a scene appear in the land of ice? She inquired toward her father with a suspicious gaze. Father, this is... Odin's body slightly shuddered, since his divine power still hadn't completely recovered. A thorny person had appeared, which caused him to be somewhat concerned. Sleipnir leaped over and said to Odin and Brunhilde, Master, we must quickly escape from this region. Li Yunmu also inquired from the system, what's going on here? Why are you not replying? Are you playing dead again? You are truly too much. System silently transmitted its thoughts. Blockhead, this old man is presently only in soul form. Don't tell me that I shouldn't conceal myself? Wait until the day when I can take human form. Then even if a master god came, let alone those ancient gods, this old man still wouldn't place them in his eyes. Without sufficient time to think, Li Yunmu leapt up and landed on Sleipnir's back, where he looked like a small ant. He then pulled Brunhilde up onto the mythical horse. Sleipnir leapt forward, wanting to immediately leave the land of ice, but what faced them were countless black shadows. They were congealed from balls of black energy and were quite similar to Li Yunmu's shadows. Yet they had sinister smiles, which could make anyone feel insecure, as if they had encountered some beast. But if it was only a beast, Odin wouldn't have been so flustered. At least an ancient god-level creature had to have showed up, since even system seemed somewhat at a loss and hadn't even raised any warning. Li Yunmu knew that the system's customary self-defense was to hide whenever someone formidable appeared, leaving everything for him to deal with. Wasn't that like striking a stone with an egg? Only if he became even more formidable would he possess the qualifications to fight against such people. Sleipnir charged forward and clashed with the black shadows, but the balls of black energy seemed to possess formidable strength and completely stopped him. Oh, this power, I am helpless. Odin leapt down from Sleipnir's back and took a deep breath. He raised his head to look at the sudden changes and indifferently said, Since you have descended, why not reveal your true self? If you want to take my life, show yourself. Brunhilde's complexion abruptly changed, and she asked anxiously, Who is it? They surprisingly dare to tread on the dignity of our Scandinavia. You treacherous scum hiding in the darkness, show yourself to me. My God will definitely let you experience his fury. Among the balls of black energy, a human silhouette appeared. The person seemed to be old and was clad in a black Chinese-styled gown. His entire body, including his head, was concealed, while his smile seemed to contain the vicissitudes of life. Odin, you have surprisingly awakened. That person has certainly assisted you? I and Zeus have anticipated this long ago, that you would finally awaken one day. But even if you have awakened, so what? Don't tell me you intend to become enemies of the entire Heavenly Gods' Council? Quickly bend your knee and pay allegiance to Heavenly Gods' Council. Only then will your Scandinavia have a glimmer of hope. Brunhilde was unable to endure others being so rude, so she raised her head and furiously looked at the newcomer. Who are you? How can an outsider like you determine the fate of our Scandinavia? I don't care about your Heavenly Gods' Council. Even though they were both heavenly gods, there was still a vast disparity between their strength. Odin seemed to dread the god in front of him, so clearly his rank wouldn't be low. Now that his people encountered such a gigantic crisis, Odin might have to yield to the ancient god in front of him in order to save everyone. Odin stopped his daughter, furiously reprimanding her, "What wanton actions! Don't be rude!" Hearing Odin's majestic voice, Brunhilde's eyes filled with shock. This was her father? Could it be that even after the other person had humiliated Scandinavia, he would continue watching indifferently? What about the glory of their Scandinavia? What was that heavenly god's counsel? But she kept all these thoughts in her heart and didn't utter another word, resolutely watching the unexpected guest without showing her incredulity. Li Yunmu narrowed his eyes, sensing the formidable strength of the opponent. Just a moment ago, when he had traded blows with Odin, it had been extremely strenuous. But if he wanted to clash with the ancient god in front of his eyes, he would probably be crushed like a melon gourd. Loading, transmitting, 39% loaded. What's the meaning of this? How could you act like a ghost now? Who exactly is this person? Why did he suddenly appear in the land of ice? Loading progress, 45%. When the system's cold voice echoed within him, Li Yunmu sensed the energy inside his body about to overspill. The system then transmitted its thoughts to him again. This old man is a system and is working, so why are you host being so talkative? When Li Yunmu heard the system's words, he couldn't help shouting out, "Motherfing a shoal!" Odin was already about to surrender, so why was the system trying to raise wind? Odin, today is the day when you make the choice. Either surrender to heavenly god's counsel, or choose death. Chapter 627, Difficult Choice. Our heavenly god's counsel does not wish for you to turn into our greatest threat. Although that person has assisted you in breaking the seal, he couldn't assist you in recovering the divine energy. Your strength is still weak, so you're not worthy of me personally taking action. As for that little girl, although that long spear possesses boundless might, in front of my black phantoms, haha, it is useless. Cold beads of sweat constantly appeared on Odin's forehead. He was completely clear in his heart that he couldn't provoke the person with the black gown standing in front of him. If he truly disobeyed the heavenly god's counsel, the ancient gods might massacre everyone in Scandinavia. Although the other gods of his land had scattered in different parts of the origin world, finding their locations would be as easy as turning their hand over for the heavenly god's counsel. Odin could only bend himself in front of them in order to protect Scandinavia. His complexion turned increasingly more pale. Even if he stalled for time, their situation wouldn't change. What? Is it very difficult to choose? Do you still want time to think? If that person has returned to the origin world, then he will become an enormous threat to our heavenly god's counsel, so we will definitely do everything we can to obstruct him. There's no need for you to put your hopes on someone who basically doesn't exist. The system deeply sighed and looked at Odin's resolute face, which had obvious hesitation on it. The system couldn't help but silently murmur to itself, "Old bastard, you have already shown enough loyalty. If you cannot handle the pressure from these people, then you must choose to protect Scandinavia first." Odin remained silent for a very long time. When he looked at the anxious expression on Brunhilde's face, he could see that his daughter had no doubts that he would never kneel, for it would be the greatest disgrace for Scandinavia. Scandinavia should rather disappear than exist without its dignity and its head lowered. "Father!" Brunhilde yelled. Odin was perspiring greatly. If he made a mistake in his decision, it wouldn't affect him alone, but the entire Scandinavia as well as the person who had removed his seal would be dragged down. Loading 70%. Faster, faster. At that moment, Li Yunmu was extremely anxious in his heart. Why was the system being such a huge letdown? A long time had already passed, but it was still at 70%. In case Odin truly betrayed the system, wouldn't he become the target of the black-robed person? Li Yunmu took a deep breath. "Odin, you must stall for more time. Odin, I see that you are willing to sacrifice the whole country for this mortal. That being the case, I will lend you a hand in accomplishing your goal." The black-robed man became furious, and the balls of black energy began to congeal constantly, after having stored sufficient energy. Odin waved his hand, and the black-robed person's expression eased somewhat. He said indifferently, "But seems like you want to think clearly? Surrender and swear allegiance to our heavenly God's counsel, and your Scandinavia will continue to exist." A glimmer of majesty appeared in Odin's gaze. It passed through the black-robed man and went toward the blue dome of heaven. He then said in a heavy voice, "Hades. At this moment, I will swear an oath on the heavens that I will never surrender and swear allegiance to heavenly God's counsel. Scandinavia will forever remain enemies with your heavenly God's counsel and won't hesitate to cause another battle like God's dusk." Upon hearing Odin's words, the black-robed man's complexion instantly changed. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Odin, you fool who doesn't understand what's good for him. Today's the day when your Scandinavia will fall, and the day when you, Odin, will lose your life." When Brunhilde heard her father's decision, she felt gratified in her heart. This was the father whom she recognized and not the person who appeared so weak just a moment ago. When the system heard Odin's decision, it was moved. "You old bastard, I hadn't expected that at the most crucial time, you will still be loyal to your friends. This old man didn't pull you back from the abyss in vain." Odin coldly looked at Hades and a hint of enthusiasm appeared in his expression. "Since my seal has been removed by a friend, I will certainly stand on his side and will definitely not betray him." Li Yunmu felt great admiration towards Odin and excitedly thought, "Keep maintaining this state, continue stalling for time. Soon, very soon now." Loading 88%. Odin's words had completely enraged the black-robed man, and the balls of black energy exploded forward. Odin's divine power hadn't returned to its full, so he was quite inferior to Hades who possessed ancient god-level strength. The balls of black energy slammed into Odin's body. They seemed to have a strong corrosive effect, for Odin's body entered a sort of ethereal state. Odin was forced to retreat by several feet because of the attack, and his body slammed against an iceberg. "Ah! Father!" Brunhilde cried out in surprise. "Since you have made this choice, you must pay the price. Now receive heavenly God's counsel's punishment." Another group of black shadows rushed toward Odin. Brunhilde yelled loudly and tried to stop them with her long spear. "I won't let you injure even a single hair on my father's body. As long as Scandinavia exists, we won't surrender to your heavenly God's counsel. Our Scandinavia's glory cannot be blemished." The long spear emitted brilliant rays of light. As they glittered, the black shadows dispersed. Hades' complexion changed. When had the Valkyrie of Scandinavia become so formidable? He didn't know that because of Li Yunmu's appearance, Brunhilde's long spear had transformed. Although the woman herself wasn't that strong, the long spear helped to raise it quite high up. But Brunhilde couldn't control the full strength of the long spear. If she truly fought with Hades, her flaws would be quickly discovered by the opponent. Although the long spear could completely disperse the phantoms, their numbers were extremely great, so the long spear became somewhat unstable. Even if it contained boundless strength, when confronted with the group of phantoms, it wasn't able to display its strange abilities. It was like how an extremely sharp sword would become useless when attacking water. When Hades noticed the flaw revealed by Brunhilde, a phantom attacked her body, and she instantly sunk into an ethereal state. When Sleipnir saw that its master and master's daughter had become like that because of the suddenly appeared black-robed person, it put all of its hope on Li Yunmu. Possibly only that person concealed in the youth's body could assist its master. "My lord, do you still not intend to take action?" Chapter 628, Mythical Realm. After the strength of the supreme transcending level experts broke through again, they became the cornerstone of Lucky Wind City. Once Black Mountain's old goblin surrendered, his plane's heavenly flying city became another base of Lucky Wind City. In order to properly manage everything, Linuero had allowed the captive experts to return with their respective masters' squad. She intended to use Flying Cloud City as the starting point from which she would conquer the powers of other planes. Lin Yuero placed this matter into the hands of the most stable of shadows, Li Tian. He led a few supreme transcending level experts toward Flying Cloud City to assist in its swift expansion. She was convinced that since the strength of the supreme transcending level experts had broken through, it would be quite simple to deal with the different races of the other planes. Lin Yuero's gaze was still focused on the surroundings of Lucky Wind City. Although the vampires had turned into a neighboring fraternal power, there were still many unexplored regions around her. She could only wait for these matters to be resolved before thinking of expanding. Li De returned to Lucky Wind City with Li Feng and Li Yun. They went to Lin Yuero to announce the results of their investigation. City Lord, although this unknown region hadn't been displayed on the map, me and my brothers feel that there is a mythical realm there and not some power accumulating power. Mythical realm. Lin Yuero narrowed her eyes. As soon as she heard that there might be a mythical realm in that region, she understood why it wasn't recorded on the map. She pondered it for a moment before stating, I will personally go to take a look. City Lord, we feel that you shouldn't go to the mythical realm, since we don't know anything about that place. If something actually happens to the City Lord, it will be a great misfortune for our Lucky Wind City. Lin Yuero shook her head. We need to verify it as quickly as possible. You shouldn't obstruct me, for I have other tasks for all of you. I will lead a few supreme transcending level experts to investigate the mythical realm. Seeing that his persuasion was fruitless, Li De could only accept her decision. He then asked somewhat suspiciously, City Lord, what are the responsibilities that you wish to hand over to us? Has there been any news from Frontline Heaven's side? Lin Yuero asked indifferently. There has been no movement on that side. Northern Frontline God has been keeping his calm. Lin Yuero felt somewhat anxious. She had a feeling that something big was happening inside Frontline Heavens, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. But since there wasn't any movement from Frontline Heavens, she decided to wait for Li Yunmu to return and then put an end to the plans of Frontline God. I'll hand over Lucky Wind City's general matters to Li De. Li Feng, you should go and investigate Heavenly Divine Religion to see whether there has been movement on that side and guarantee the stability of the forces in our rear. If something happens, immediately inform Li De so he can prepare for war. Li Yun, you are in charge of watching Frontline Heavens as before. I feel that something big will happen on their side tonight. If it truly does, we will face a fierce battle which might decide the fate of Lucky Wind City. After Lin Yuero was finished speaking, the three shadows bowed toward her. Yes. Around Lucky Wind City, it seemed like there was no breeze nor waves, but actually a great storm was brewing. The calmer it was, the more anxious Lin Yuero became. But she had to investigate the strange region. Perhaps in that unknown land, she could find some method to increase the strength of her supreme transcending level experts. After delegating the responsibilities of Lucky Wind City, Lin Yuero brought over a couple supreme transcending level experts and sneaked out of Lucky Wind City in extreme secrecy. She knew that the information about her not being present in Lucky Wind City couldn't be leaked out to other powers. Otherwise, the danger to the city would increase. City Lord, why did this mythical realm enter your discerning eye? Since this region wasn't marked on the map, it clearly means that very few people go there. If we could investigate it properly, we would be the first ones to find the resources of this region. But we don't even know what exactly this mythical realm holds. What if we encounter some danger and get trapped forever in that region? Then what? Lin Yuero didn't think about it too much. Since she was the city lord of Lucky Wind City, she had to personally take action when faced with such matters. She wanted to serve as an example and not need others to become the scapegoat. In truth, she could have dispatched other people, but this was an extremely dangerous matter. I have already made my decision. Now quickly enter. City Lord. Lin Yuero signaled with her eyes, and the helpless supreme transcending experts could only escort her into the mythical realm. Why hadn't it been discovered by anyone before? Was the reason for it that after someone entered the place, they could not come out? After all, if no one ever came out, how could they describe the specifics of the mythical realm? Lin Yuero's action of entering the region filled all powers around her with agitation. Frontline God. Regarding our plan, we must continue to proceed with it. You also know about that little girl in Lucky Wind City. I heard she achieved an effortless victory against the experts of another plane and captured their territory. Could those so-called experts compare to you and me? With Li Yunmiu being away, we got a hard-to-find opportunity. Do you want to give up? Frontline God sneered at the speaker. The Pope shook his head like a rattle. Those people of Lucky Wind City are excessively savage. Today, we will thoroughly defeat them. The strength of heavenly divine religion and frontline heavens wasn't like the strength of the four trash factions of Flying Cloud City. Both of them had elite experts as their subordinates, which made them the two powers which possessed highest threat toward the Lucky Wind City. This was also the reason why Lin Yuero hadn't been able to relax with them around. A small smile was on Frontline God's face. You must keep your calm, Pope. We already have the initiative. Who knows how many people of Lucky Wind City are monitoring you and me? Since we have decided to act, we must put on the best play for them. What do you mean? From the people I have dispatched to spy on Lucky Wind City, I learned that the trifling city lord of theirs has left the city. Tonight is our one and only opportunity. The people left behind by Li Yunmiu don't pose much of a threat toward us. That little girl might have planned some strategies, but what a pity, she went into the mythical realm never to come out. Mythical realm? Pope asked in astonishment. Chapter 629, Striking Down Everything After Entering the Dark Mode. Frontline God drank a sip of tea and then said with a faint smile, You know, there's an unknown realm in the northwestern direction of Lucky Wind City. Until now, many people have entered to explore that region, but few of them have returned. According to the latest information delivered by the people of my frontline heavens, the city lord of Lucky Wind City went into the mythical realm last night. She definitely won't come out, and without that girl, Lucky Wind City is scattered sand. If we want to eliminate them, wouldn't that be as easy as turning our hand over? Ha ha ha, I truly hadn't expected that, Frontline God. It's amazing how you used a false body to deliver the Azure Dragon Gauntlet. Not only did you fool Li Yunmiu and God Undercurrent, but even all the other schemers. Seems like Frontline God has already planned everything properly. I heard that the little girl has always acted quite secretly. Frontline God, how could you plant your spies near her? Frontline God burst out laughing. I cannot share the details with you. I have a mole among their supreme transcending level experts. That Li Yunmiu would not think even in his worst nightmares that the person who had stayed by his side for so long and had earned his trust is surprisingly a traitor. Ha ha ha. I can imagine Li Yunmiu vomiting blood after returning. Ah, Frontline God is quite formidable. Your gaze is far-sighted. Seems like this Pope has much to learn from you. Tonight, Divine Religion will dispatch troops to attack and stir the winds in Lucky Wind City, Pope said with a smile. Frontline God raised his cup with a smile and said, We will continue to drink tea. That little girl is still lacking, if she wants to compete with us. Using some small tricks and pretending to be the master of strategy isn't sufficient to instill fear in us. After this, constant laughter of two people continued to resound in the negotiation hall. That night, perhaps the entire Lucky Wind City will be thrown into chaos, while its core, Lin Yuero, was treading a deadly path while not knowing that an imminent crisis was about to descend on her city. Loading 98%. Li Yunmiu clenched his teeth and roared at the black-robed man, I will be your opponent. If you want to kill Odin, then you first have to pass through me. Odin, who had turned ethereal, looked at Li Yunmiu and said in a heavy voice, Thou must run away. Thou aren't his opponent. You mustn't destroy the only hope of my friend who resides in your body. The one who replied to him was Sleipnir, Master, that mortal is the only one who can save you. If he ran away, what will you do? A peculiar light shone in Brunhilde's gaze, and she emotionally said to Li Yunmu, "You go, run away. He is very powerful. I hope that nothing happens to you." When Li Yunmu heard Brunhilde being concerned about him, he couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. Even at the critical moment of life and death, she was concerned about him. How could he possibly disregard their lives and run away alone? And also why? Just to save the system, the only hope for the origin world's salvation? No, this wasn't his original aspiration. It wasn't to rescue the origin world with the support of the system's strength, but to flip over the entire origin world with the assistance of the system. Odin hadn't renounced him and the system in order to save Scandinavia, then on what grounds could he abandon Odin and Brunhilde? Li Yunmu's gaze gradually began to burn with battle intent, and the system's loading also finally reached 100%. "Brunhilde, I am sorry that I couldn't protect you earlier. Now, I will break the arrogance of this ancient god who believes himself to be unparalleled in this world." Li Yunmu almost began to roar at the end of his sentence, shaking heaven and earth. "Today, heavens won't be able to cover my eyes." Li Yunmu's pupils suddenly turned black. Odin looked at him from the corner of his eye while Brunhilde stared stupefied. Besides them, Slain Per was even more shocked. Li Yunmu himself also gradually turned dark, his eyes becoming completely black. A dark energy covered him from head to toe. Program loaded. Host has entered dark state. Host has also comprehended an ultimate ability, Dark Quantum Explosion Strike. Experience points increased by 10,000 points, system has been upgraded to 9th level. All the attributes of Host have advanced, all abilities raised by one realm. Li Yunmu's consciousness was completely occupied by the darkness. Besides killing intent, no other emotion existed in his gaze. Only slaughter could calm him at that moment. Everything was because of the darkness in the sky, which had caused the transformations in Li Yunmu's heart. The system had taken advantage of the situation, transforming his viciousness into strength. It heaved a deep sigh of relief, finally having finished. Li Yunmu in the dark state could firmly hold on against an ancient grade-level opponent for a period of time. "Your time in dark state is limited, requesting Host to battle quickly." Upon hearing the system's reminder, Li Yunmu roared. The cyan blade in his hand morphed into a shadow and suddenly launched an attack at Hades. His offense was like raindrops, constantly slamming into all corners of Hades' body. But Hades quickly transformed into the Black Phantoms, which made Li Yunmu unable to find him. But the so-called phantom doppelgangers were an insignificant skill, so how could Li Yunmu fear it? His shadows also separated, surrounding him. Without careful observation, it was impossible to tell which of them was the true Li Yunmu. Li Yunmu clearly sensed the shock in Hades' gaze. This was clearly a dark attribute ability. But how could a mortal have comprehend a peak ability of dark attribute? Could it be because of the assistance of that person in his body? The system sneered at him. "Hades, who could have thought that this day would come? I have helped my host to defeat you using dark attribute. Do you feel shocked yet? Ha ha ha, just an ant hiding in the body of the mortal. I will definitely strike you from this mortal body." Again the same words? Even though Li Yunmu had already entered the dark state, his consciousness still existed. He slightly wrinkled his eyebrows and the cyan blade in his hands quickly launched a blitz attack on Hades. But after Hades returned to the dark sky, truly hitting him was easier said than done. In the dark space unleashed by Hades, he is almost invincible. You aren't a novice in fighting, right? Quickly smash his space and bring him down. Only then your attacks will be effective against him. Clearly, the system had a complete understanding of the ancient gods. After Li Yunmu heard the system's words, his eyes grew colder, and he furiously roared at his opponent. "Accept your death! Hades, eat my dark quantum explosion strike!" The densely packed black clouds in the sky trembled as a black chi congealed at the center, gradually emitting energy. Chapter 630, The Dark State's Power. The energy being released from the black chi congealed at the center was like an enormous halo. It gradually became more powerful and wrapped around the sword, which struck down. Bang! The entire black space turned illusionary and then completely disappeared. The black clouds above everyone's head dissipated, and the black chi also became illusionary. Odin and Brunhilde's bodies began to recover their strength as the ethereal state dissipated. This. Odin's eyes were filled with shock. Brunhilde also hadn't anticipated that a mortal like Li Yunmu would be able to shatter the black space of King of Hell Hades. Moreover, he was also using a dark attribute. This was an extreme humiliation for Hades. His proficiency in dark attribute had always been his pride. But it was disgraced by a mortal who had shaken up his confidence. Mortal! You are courting death. Li Yunmu, however, wasn't concerned about that. According to the system's instructions, he again unleashed a frantic strike. The cyan blade in his hand transformed into countless remnant blades, and a burst of energy flashed forward, which caused Hades to instantly retreat by more than 10 feet. Both Odin and Brunhilde couldn't believe the scene in front of their eyes. It was especially so for Odin. If his divine power had recovered, he might have some assurance in breaking Hades' black space. But the person in front of him who wanted to marry his daughter, how could he have broken the black space while being just a mortal? Is it you again? My friend, thou hadn't retreated yet? Are you still within this mortal's body? The system inside Li Yunmu didn't give any reply to Odin as Li Yunmu's eyes kept turning increasingly more dark and black energy covered his body. When Li Yunmu saw Hades while in his dark state, he fiercely pounced on him like a deranged man. With the blade in his hand, he began to battle with blade intent flowing out of his body. It has to be known that Hades was only under Zeus in terms of strength, yet he was now being suppressed by a mortal. This was a disgrace to the whole heavenly gods' council as well as Hades, who had never suffered the shame of defeat. After the black space was shattered, the darkness covering the land of ice gradually turned into an undercurrent that flowed into Li Yunmu's body. Hades' eyes went wide. The exiled guy in the mortal's body, what was he trying to do to that mortal by suddenly pouring this formidable strength into his body? Odin couldn't dare to believe his eyes. He didn't know what sort of existence was the person in Li Yunmu's body, but he was clear that most of the important secrets in the origin world were linked to him in countless ways. The Master God had already sensed his arrival and wanted to strangle him before his strength matured. But it seemed that this was extremely difficult. The heavenly gods' council couldn't even defeat the mortal, let alone overpowering the Lord in his body. Odin knew that regardless of how many changes had happened in the origin world, everyone still divided the land into factions, both gods and humans alike, and all of them existed in harmony. After Odin personally experienced the mortal's strength making a breakthrough, he made a decision in his heart, which was to stand on Li Yunmu's side. He was convinced that this mortal would definitely become one of the overlords of the origin world and could even stir the situation of heavenly gods' council. Hades' eyes opened widely, and the arrogance in them faded away. He suddenly felt weak, because the dark attribute power in his body was being drained away at a pace visible to the naked eye. It was clear that the mortal in front of him had unleashed some sort of terrifying ability that was constantly absorbing power from his body. Mortal, your luck is pretty good, but that won't work every time. As Hades spoke, he clearly felt that he couldn't resist for much longer. Even if he continued to fight back, the mortal would continue absorbing blood and chi. This was a quite inferior choice compared to retreating for the time being and recovering his strength. After Li Yunmu entered the dark state, his battle intent had soared rapidly, so he naturally won't let Hades off easily. When Hades saw that his opponent wasn't intending to spare him, he was astonished. Was it possible that the guy was planning to use the mortal body to kill an ancient god? Li Yunmu burst forth with the strength of the dark state. With blade intent flowing out of his entire body, he ruthlessly struck down toward Hades. The dark attribute energy covered his body, which was unable to constrain the continuously bubbling forth strength. Apart from battle, he couldn't think of any other method to drain away this power. When Hades was attacked by the mortal once more, it was already more than he could handle. He appeared to have lost his fighting spirit. His dignity of a god was now being trampled upon by the mortal named Li Yunmu. He was injured. If not for the dark attribute power in his body obstructing Li Yunmu's fatal strike, he might have become an ancient god killed by a mortal. Reminding host, less than 5 minutes remain in the dark state. Requesting host to conclude the battle quickly. Upon hearing the system's repeated reminder, Li Yunmu not only didn't slow down his attacks, he increased his speed. Where could Hades find the strength to endure such a fierce onslaught? He suddenly sensed warmth in his chest, and blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. Odin and Brunhilde were struck dumb. The mortal's strength was simply too terrifying. An attack similar to a meteor crashing onto Earth inflicted serious damage to Hades. Host, 1 minute remaining. Conclude the battle. However, Li Yunmu seemed to have lost reason in the dark state. He didn't seem to hear the system's reminder and continued to launch never-ending attacks toward Hades without giving him any chance to retreat. If Hades hadn't established a barrier of dark attribute energy a moment before Li Yunmu's attack, he probably would have been killed right there and then. The dark attribute barrier was shattered and turned into a ball of black shadow before dispersing. This caused Hades to tremble continuously. This sort of strength even surpassed Master God level. 30 breaths remaining. Li Yunmu didn't seem to hear it and roared, "Dark quantum explosion strike!" Enormous strength congealed in his body, and he moved in for the final attack. Heaven and earth changed colors, and thunderclaps rang out. A white silhouette suddenly flashed in the sky. White light glimmered, and a bolt of thunder fell down, but this formidable power was obstructed.